controlled by Mussolini or Hitler or a person filled with a demonic spirit, we're in one heck of a problem. If that democratic society of the world government would be a representative of each country of the world, then in fact we could be able to stabilize as people upon the earth. The attitude that the multi-internationalists is to come up with zero growth, industrial growth, zero population growth. When I was making a presentation in Geneva to 52 nations there, I was blocked in presenting this technology, not because of the viability of the technology, because the international attitude is they do not want industrial growth to be maintained. There is a move to try to force the countries to accept that they would sign over their natural resource rights. That if you sign over your natural resource rights, you have taken over the countries without even firing a shot. This is to help bring in a one world government. The number one thing that will diffuse the entire episode and be able to maintain us is to bring an alternate energy source in that we can be able to sustain and maintain not only the industrial base of this country, but of the world. And therefore, I will share this information with you. And once I share it with you, then you have a responsibility. I'm sharing a responsibility to you so great. Now, the power structures to be, we all hear about the guys that invent the carburetors that go 200 miles per hour and what have you, and they never get out of the market area. We talk about high energy systems, development of high technology, and they never seem to get out in the marketplace. Why is that? You know, and Rockefeller was a very smart man to get our economies to operate on fossil fuel. He got a hold of a think tank. And in the think tank, he says, I want you to come up with motivating thoughts that would demotivate the people in order to bring us up on the fossil fuels. You see, at that time, we're talking about high energy research and development, are we not? And yet Rockefeller wanted to convince the population of the world that we need fossil fuel to maintain the economies, and therefore suppress and prevent alternate energy sources to come forward. And so in this think tank, he came up with such phraseologies. Well, you can always lead a horse to water, but you can't get him to drink. Any of you have ever said that? You know, if you say that out of your mouth, you know that you believe it. It's the greatest lie in the world. If you lead a horse to water and he doesn't want to drink, I'll assure you that if you stake him about 4 feet away from the water in 2 days flat, he'll try to break the rope to get to the water. If you want to speed up the process, feed him some salt. Another great demotivating thought. Well, you can't buck City Hall. How about another demotivating thought? 2 things you never discuss is politics and religion. Do you know why in the news medias that you are bombarded with tremendous negativism? Because they had found out the physical, psychological makeup of the individual is such that if you receive so much negativism, you turn it off. Do you know that if our forefathers and our grandfathers would awaken out of their graves and see what's taking place in our country today, do you know what happened? They would grab their arms and go to Washington, D.C. and clean out our government. Absolutely. The negativism that's presenting to you is the process of desensitizing you to allow such atrocities to take over. And if you don't think that there are people in the world that do not want America to stand, you know why? Because the Constitution in the United States, the Bill of Rights, says as free people we have ability to enjoy certain inalienable rights that was given to us by God. And unfortunately there are some people who does not want us to continue to enjoy the freedom that our forefathers fought. And when I turned and said, I will do this, Lord, it had to be by faith. Because I was given a great gift. That gift was to be raised under freedom. Now let's see how we can use water as fuel. Because the greatest thing that all political leaders fear, that you and I would come together in one accord. That if you and I would come together in one accord, no political system in the world, no multi-internationalist groups could defeat you. Look what happened to Russia after 70 years. They said, so we no longer want communism. We're tired of the KGB killing our people, torturing our people. And they said, enough is enough. And that's why you receive the negativism. That's why in these conferences that they will try to promote and try to tell you that you have not the power of say-so in our in our government. And I want to tell you that under the Constitution of the United States, read it, for it gives us the ultimate power to be able to determine the destiny and the strength of our country. And how I'm bringing this technology in, it can't come through the multi-international structures. If I would sign over this technology to General Electric or Westinghouse, then we'd be taken over within 24 hours. If you think you got political pressures in the United States government, try to negotiate with the military. For their political pressures is great, and they cry out. And you know, when the Arabs came to me and offered me $1 billion, cold cash, simply to stop on the technology, and when I said no, I will not do this. And he said, you will be stopped. And I said, why is that? He said, because the apathy of the American people is such that they will not come behind you. And for a long time, that statement stood out. But I will assure you, today, not only in the United States, but in the world, that they're coming together in one accord and say it's enough. Because if we do not reverse this, I've recently come back from Sweden. Their entire forests are dying. Why? Because the pollutants that's going in the air, covalently linking up with the ionosphere, is decreasing the light intensity coming into this atmosphere. And as a result of this decrease in light intensity, bacteria is now allowed to grow, which is now causing blight, which is now starting to kill our trees. Go over and look in the Black Forest that even the trees and the roots are dying. We are on a planet, which is our spaceship, and if we do not reverse, if we do not come together in one accord, then I would say, gentlemen, that we will not survive. Now, when we show this technology, you must now make the decision whether or not you come together in one accord and try, and we can do it, to come together to keep this country strong, as well as to protect it. And when President Reagan was advised of this technology, he turned against the multi-internationalists and said, do not block or do not allow this technology to go forward. And he wrote the executive action to ensure that this technology would not only be protected for the United States, but also to be protected for the world. And it's amazing to me that we have the abilities that we can proceed on. Go ahead. The first thing, and always been the first objective, and always will be the first objective in developing the technology, you must legalize it first and then bring it in. Many inventors blow their ego, they get to their Achilles heel to try to obtain the information, not for the benefit of you and I, but it's the benefit of control or manipulation or suppression of that technology. So when you develop your high technology, you do everything possible. The prime objective is to legalize the technology. When you receive that gold seal and that little red ribbon, it says that you have complied with the laws of the land. Is it not so? It's not what Stan Meyer says. It's what is now been legalized. And if there's any question of operability of the technology under the law, whether they have, they'll pull you under U.S. Code 35 U.S. Code 101 and show operability. And when we showed operability of this technology, then it became a great concern to protect this technology for all the countries as well as the United States. So as I move, there are many people who have seeked to try to cause me to stumble, have tried to seek to suppress me, has tried to seek in many ways, but the Lord has always allowed that we can proceed on with the technology. As we're legalizing the technology, I'm subject to the national security laws of this country. I'm also subject to the national security laws of other countries under PCT Treaty Act. Other countries who now are informed of this type of technology is requesting that this technology would also be protected for their countries. For you see, if this type of technology is restricted from those other countries, then their entire economic base could collapse. You know, if you can use water as a fuel source to maintain an industrial base of one country, but if it's blocked in another, you can drop the prices on your goods and commodities, and therefore the other country cannot be able to sustain itself. Unfortunately, there are those who seek the power controlled by greed, right? And seems to have the desire to control man under greed. It's a form of a sickness. And unfortunately, in my many battles, we've had to overcome this type in order to bring this technology out. So you'll have to forgive me for those who feel that I should have brought the technology out further, I had to be in compliance with both the U.S. and the national security laws and the PCT Treaty Act in order to get around the loopholes that are set there not for you and I, but set there to control and manipulate the high technology. And so, if you never violate that prime directive, you can bring it in. Go ahead. Water is fuel. You know, how many of you here today have driven a car here? Any of you driven cars at all? Do you realize that when you're driving on gasoline, do you know that you're running on a hydrogen? You know that if you look at the chemical equation of gasoline, you will find out the hydrogen atom is attached to the carbon atom. Is not so? And basically, in the highest octane of gasoline, you have roughly about a half a pound of hydrogen to it. Now, water, on the other hand, is 2 to 1. 2 hydrogen atoms to 1 oxygen atom. Is it not so? How many pounds of hydrogen do we have in water? You find out by the atomic weight is around 1.7 pounds of hydrogen in water. I had the most scientific compilation study on hydrogen that's ever come out of the scientific world from NASA. Did we not propel the Columbia spaceship by hydrogen and oxygen? And in that report, it clearly stipulated that hydrogen was the most ideal fuel of the future. It can be utilized anywhere, solve even the environmental pollution problem, but they did not have an answer in 3 areas. 1, to produce the hydrogen gas or release it economically from water, control the rate of production, be able to adjust the burn rate of hydrogen gas to co-equal to fossil fuels, and add the 4th one, be able to transport it without spark ignition. I wrote all the patent rights both nationally and internationally on this type of technology, to be able to use water as a fuel source. Go ahead. Now, in order to solve the problem as a scientist, you got to learn to ask the right question. This particular quest was, how in the world can you switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule and do it economically? You know, Einstein said even that there was enough energy in a gallon of water that if you knew how to release it, you could take the power of a 1,000-car train around the earth many, many, many times. Now, when you do your research and development work, don't go back and try to reinvent the same thing that's been being reinvented over and over and over again. To solve a problem, an energy problem, you must go in a different direction. And in this direction, we had to find a way to simply switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule and not process the water molecule in any way. In order to understand this, then, we went back, and the Lord was showing me, he said, okay, what happens in the law of physics? That for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? Okay, so when the unlike atoms of the hydrogen atoms covalently link up to the oxygen, normally the oxygen atom has 8 protons and 8 electrons, does it not? But when the oxygen atom now accepts the negative charge electron of the hydrogen atom, now what happens? There's an electrical imbalance that occurs because you still have 8 protons, but you now have a total of 10 electrons, do you not? And under the law of physics says that the first orbit will, the L orbit or K orbit, can maintain up to 2 electrons, isn't that so? But in the next orbit, the L orbit, says to reach stable state to form the water molecule, you can have up to 8 electrons, isn't that so? Now after 8 electrons is now accepted in the L orbit, now the water molecule goes into stable state. But since the hydrogen atom now is sharing its negative charged electron, then the positive charged proton swings the hydrogen atom to a positive electrical charge. Oh boy, Lord. Now what can prove that out? Well, if you put a cup of water in a microwave oven and you send a microwave through the water, does it not heat up the water molecule? And how does the water molecule become agitated? Because the microwave produces a positive and negative potential which now oscillates the water molecule, because the water molecule takes on opposite electrical charges. Now, when this negative electrical charge is now formed, that negative charge is now formed equivalent to the 2 shared negative electrons, is not so? That under the law of physics, that for every action there's a equal and opposite reaction. As a result, now we're setting up an opposite electrical charge, Q and Q prime. Now the next question is asked, is there an electromagnetic field that exists between the oxygen and the hydrogen atom? And the answer is no. For you see, when the oxygen atom accepts the negative charge electron of the hydrogen atom, these electrons pair together, and as a result, cancels out the electromagnetic field, and the oxygen atom does not take on an electromagnetic charge. Oh boy, Lord, this is getting good. And it became very obvious then that all I had to do was go opposite to the electrolysis process. Shut off the flow of amps and expose the water molecule to a high pulse voltage field. Go ahead. Now we know under Coulomb's law of electrical force and under Newton's second law of electrical force, does not voltage perform work? It is not unknown in physics that voltage absolutely performs work. Is that not the sum basis of electronic circuit design? When you turn on the TV set here, you not attenuate the grid, the positive voltage behind the grid, that as you attenuate the voltage, you accelerate the negative charge electron struck in the fluorescent screen, which now produces a greater light intensity. We know, in fact, that voltage does absolutely perform work. Under Coulomb's law and Newton's second law of electrical force and electronic circuit, would not the positive voltage of this voltage field, if you restrict amps, would it not attract the negative charge electron? Have you ever heard in physics that opposite charges will what? Attract, right? How about like charges? Would not now the negative voltage field here repel that negative charge electron? Absolutely. You know, when we went into the patent office under 35 U.S. Code 101, showed it to the examiner chief, the experts in physics, chemistry, and electronics, and they realized it was a cold process, they asked the infamous question, why in the world did no one ever think about this? I said, well, you want me to give you an answer? I said, number one, I said, the knowledge of water will come out of time in great trouble. But the reason why Faraday did not discover the electrical polarization process, you see, he needed modern day inventions. He needed the modern day invention of stainless steel 304 material, which forms the voltage zones, which is chemically inert to the process. It does not chemically react to liberated hydrogen and oxygen atoms. You see, he didn't have stainless steel back in those days. The second thing he didn't have the prior knowledge that the water molecule takes on opposite electrical charges. And he didn't have modern electronic circuit design to restrict amps and allow voltage to take over in a dead short condition. He worked with a very crude battery. When he put the electrolyte into the water, it created a dead short condition, and amp flow resolved, and there was no way to restrict the amps because it was dead short. It was a dead short condition. So you see, when you look at modern day inventions, look and see the technology, how and why you can use that advancement of technology for the benefit of mankind. Go ahead. Now it became quite obvious that all I had to do is to restrict the amps and expose the water molecule to opposite voltage zone. Would not the negative charge oxygen atom now be attracted to the positive voltage zone? Under the law of physics, opposite charges will what? Attract, right? Would not the positive charge hydrogen atom now be attracting to the negative voltage zone? And therefore you're overcoming the electrical attraction force of the water molecule. You're now causing the water molecule to expand. You're changing the time-share rate of the electron, and you're switching off the covalent bonding of the water molecule, and now you're releasing the hydrogen and oxygen atom for ordinary natural water without processing the water or without adding any form of chemicals to it. It's a physical process. Why? Because do you consume a voltage field in an electronic circuit? No. Voltage performs a physical process of opposite electrical attraction. Therefore, when you release the hydrogen and oxygen atom, when you release it, you're now processing and using the energy from the hydrogen atom, which is 2.5 times greater than that of gasoline. That's not my figures, that's the National Bureau of Figures, National Bureau of Standards figures. You can go over there and look at their books. You will see that that energy is 2.5 times gasoline. Notice the reference. It's not 2.5 times fingernail polish, and it's not 2.5 times lipstick. It's 2.5 times gasoline. is a very powerful fuel. Now, since we're now overcoming the electrical attraction force, go ahead. We are also now starting to switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecules. So when they tell you it takes a tremendous amount of energy to release something. For an example, I have an electrical magnet here, and I energize electromagnets, and I draw a metal plate up to it that weighed 1 ton. As long as that electromagnet is creating the electromagnetic field to hold the metal, if you kept on trying to pull that metal, you would never break the field, right? But how much energy does it take to go over there and simply switch off the switch to de-energize the coil? Would not the metal just simply fall apart? So on the covalent switch off, what happens is you're putting electrical stress. Are you not now deflecting that negative charge electron to the positive voltage field? Is that not so in physics? You ever look at gas ionization tubes? Therefore, what happens is you're now translating the electrical stress to the particles inside the nucleus that are arranged in a geometrical configuration. They are now spinning, and as you put the electrical stress onto these component parts inside the nucleus, it now slows down the gyroscopic speed, and under the electromagnetic theory of magnetism says that whenever an electrically charged particle moves through an electrostatic field, what's its byproduct? Anybody know? The electromagnetic energy. So the strength of the electromagnetic energy is directly related to the velocity or the speed of the moving of the electron. Is it not so? So if you will slow down the movement of the speed of the velocity of the electron, if you now slow down the gyroscopic action within the nucleus, you now can weaken the electromagnetic fields of the atoms. Now we know in physics there are 4 forces that affect the atom. What are they? The electrical force, the electromagnetic force, weak and strong nuclear force. What's the number 1 that affects the other 3? Voltage. You attenuate the electrical fields of the atom, you can attenuate the fields of all of the other parts of the atom by voltage. Go ahead. Now how do we do this? And do it in such a way that we don't consume a great deal of power. The Lord had me to develop what we call a VIC coil. And we've taken the voltage zones here, and we've now constructed a resonant cavity. Now, is not natural water a dielectric liquid? Sure it is. Since it has 8 electrons in its L orbit, it has a total capacity of 8 electrons in that orbit. It says I don't want any more electrons. I'm not going to exchange electrons. And so the dielectric value of water is around 78.54, or it poses the movement of electrons 78.54 times greater than air. Is it not so? So if you don't process the water in any way, utilize and key in on the dielectric properties of water. Now, these are very simple answers to a very complex problem. I will assure you, back during the era of embargo, there was not in the books. If they were in the books, I would not have obtained the patents into processing. In order to do this now, when I put the dielectric liquid between 2 electrical plates, what do I form? Electronic guys? Capacitor, do I not? Now, if I hook a coil in series to this capacitor, here and here, what do I have developed? A resonant charging token, do I not? And therefore now you set up a pulsing where you're now taking like 12 volts and amplifying up to 20,000 volts, and as you pulse this, you now create the magnetic field of the coil, which opposes the movement of the electron. And because of the inductance capacitance of the coil, you are now allowing voltage to be applied across the resonant cavity and restricting amp flow by 90 degrees. So therefore, when you adjust the pulse frequency, you're tuning into the dielectric properties of water. Amp flow goes down to minimum, and voltage tries to go towards infinity if the electronic components will allow it to occur. Now, the question is, how do you produce electricity? Anybody know?